Hi, welcome to the process. I'm sorry. Welcome to I was about to say welcome to the process timeline. I'm all higgledy-piggledy today. 10 minutes before the start of the webinar, I went into Zoom to start it, and there was no webinar to start. Apparently, the webinars that I set up last week was the last one. And in the old days, that would have been a disaster because I would have had to create an entirely new webinar and restart the entire thing from scratch. Apparently, Zoom has upgraded a bit since the last time I checked, and you can just add new webinars to an existing webinar, even if the final one has already occurred. So I was able to extend the webinar out to December of 2027. But for a minute there, I thought we weren't going to be having a webinar at all today. So I'm all over the place. I have to calm myself down from crisis mode. This is the training webinar. Hi, welcome to it. I'm Dale Franks. Today, we're going to talk about process timeline activity types. And there are a lot of them, which means we can't spend much time on each one. And it also means that we need to get started pretty quickly with doing this. So let's talk about the different timeline activity types that are available to you. This is a blank process timeline. There's no activity types. I'm going to go ahead and create my first one. Now, we're going to cover very briefly a little bit of configuration stuff whenever you're creating a process timeline. When you create a process timeline activity, the very first type of activity that will always be created, in fact, anytime you create a timeline activity, the default activity that will be created will be a user activity. So that's the activity type that we have here. You can change the activity types by going to the activity tab of the timeline activity, going to the activity type dropdown, and picking the activity type that you want to run. So these are all of the activity types that we'll be talking about today. For all timeline activity types, no matter what type they are, you have to set up dependencies on them. So if I create a second activity, when I create an activity, by default, it's just going to create it to start whenever the timeline starts. So if I drop two activities on here, like I've just done, then both activities will start immediately when the process timeline starts. So we need to set up a dependency between our activities so that they happen sequentially. The easiest way to do that is to go to this little icon here. It's the third icon in this little set of icons where it says drag this object to add a depends on. I can drag activity 2 to activity 1. That sets my dependency. Now activity 2 will not start until activity 1 is done. These dependencies are super important, because you don't want every activity on your timeline to immediately start when the timeline starts, but also in the context of doing the different types of activities that we're doing, dependency becomes super important. Because if I try to run a script at the same time I run a user activity, okay, the script will fire, and the user activity will fire. They'll both happen at the same time, let's say, and we probably don't care too much because by the time the user actually gets to open his user activity, the script will have already fired and whatever the script was supposed to do will already have been done. And by the time the user gets to it, everything that's supposed to be done will be done, and it doesn't cause a problem. But let's say that I mess up with an end process activity, which just ends the process instantly. If I have an end process activity and a user activity running simultaneously, the user activity will start assuming, well, let's do this. Let's go into the second activity. Let's go to the Start When tab. This is where your dependencies are set up. Most of this you should already know, but we're going to remove this dependence, and we're also going to change this activity type to an end process activity. Okay, so these two activities are going to run simultaneously, right? Well, technically, because activity 1 is placed above activity 2 in this particular configuration, activity 1 will actually start. And as soon as activity 1 starts, activity 2 will fire and it will end the timeline. So what will most likely happen is that the user will receive an email notification that says, hey, you've been assigned an activity. Now, they may or may not. It depends on how fast this is all happening on Process Director, because now we're in the microsecond time scale. This activity will fire, it will invoke, and then this activity will fire and invoke because it knows that, well, okay, I've got to fire that activity. So let's start that. Okay, this activity also has to fire. Let's start that. Starting activity 2 will automatically end activity 1. So it may be possible that your user receives a notification that they've been assigned an activity. And of course, by the time they receive the email, that activity will have long since been ended. So dependencies are super important when we're talking about running multiple activity types. So in this case, I would definitely, if I wanted the user to do activity 1, then I would want activity 2 here, which is an end process activity, which will just stop the entire timeline. I need to be sure that that doesn't run until activity 1 has ended. On the other hand, if I was to change the order of these two activities, so let's remove this dependence, and we will move activity 2 up here so that it's above activity 1. Now both of these activities are occurring simultaneously, theoretically, except activity 1 will never actually be invoked, because the process timeline, which does read from top to bottom, when the process timeline gets to the spot and it sees that end activity, activity 1 doesn't matter. I mean, in the real world, no matter what the order is, activity 1 is not going to matter because activity 2 will just end the timeline instantly. But in this case, activity 1 probably is not even going to be invoked, because we're going to invoke activity 2 because there's a list of activities that we have to invoke, and we invoke them one at a time. So we have 2 activities that have to run. So activity 2 comes first, we'll run it. Oh, that ends the timeline. It's done. Great. Activity 1 will most likely never be invoked because activity 2 will kill the timeline. So those dependencies are important. And whenever you're dealing with multiple activity types, a lot of these activity types just fire and move on. So the custom task activity, it invokes the custom task and then moves on. As soon as that custom task is done, that activity is done as well. And those activities those custom tasks may take very little time to run. If you're running an activity like, attach document or whatever, that's going to happen super fast. If you're doing some sort of long PDF conversion, well, that activity may take some time. So we can't really, for most of the activities that we have in Process Director, except for the user activity and the wait activity, assuming that we configure it correctly, most of the time we don't know how long the activities are going to take. Although we can, in most cases, assume that that activity is going to be over really, really quickly, because most of the activities automate something in Process Director. It runs very quickly, and then we move on to the next activity. So as I said, the activity type dropdown is where you choose the activity type that you're going to have. So we're just going to go through all of the activity types one at a time, give you an explanation of what they do. I've got some examples as well, and we'll take a look at some of those examples. So we'll start off with the user activity. Now, one of the things about the different activity types is each activity type is going to change the UI that you see whenever you open the timeline activity. So if we open up a user activity, we will see that we have, well, an activity tab, which everything has, but we also have a participants, a results, start when, completed when, needed when, due date, notifications, advanced options. We have all these wonderful tabs that we have to configure for a user activity type. But for a different activity type, so we'll go to this other timeline over here where we're just running a notification activity. I'm missing a lot of tabs. I don't need a results tab. I don't need a participants tab. In fact, I don't need any of the custom tabs. All I'll have is the standard tabs on a notify activity that are common to all process timeline activities. Now, most activities do have their own unique tab that will appear immediately after the activity tab. So right now we have activity and then it goes straight to start when. But if we go back to a process activity, I will at least have a process tab that shows up for that activity type. And so each activity type, most of them, not all of them, the notification doesn't, the end process doesn't, but most other activity types have at least one custom tab that has to be configured that is unique to that activity type. So for a custom task activity, there is a custom task tab and so forth. The user activity, though, has the most. So anytime that you are configuring a user activity, there are some tabs that you have to configure. A user activity, of course, has to be completed by a user, so we have a participants tab. By default, the timeline initiator is set up as the primary default for creating a user tab. The timeline initiator is whatever user started the timeline. So if you're the form submitter and the form, when submitted, starts a process timeline, then as the form submitter, you are also the timeline initiator. So if I have a timeline that is always invoked by a form submission, I can always fairly reliably assume that the timeline initiator is the person who submitted the form. That is not always true, however. So let's say that I have a timeline that is invoked by a goal. And based on the result of the goal, it might start a process timeline. That gets a lot trickier to know who the timeline initiator is. So the timeline initiator is very reliable if I know that the timeline is invoked by a form submission, because I always know the form submitter is the timeline initiator. If that timeline is started by a goal, all right, well, that's really the system starting the process timeline. And so the timeline initiator in that case is most likely the goal creator who created the goal. Similarly, if I have a knowledge view, and you can configure a knowledge view to start a new process for each row that the knowledge view returns. So if the knowledge view returns 10 rows, I'm going to kick off 10 processes. In that case, then the knowledge view creator is most likely going to be, or shouldn't say that, the person who, if you manually run a knowledge view, or for that matter, if you were to manually run a goal, in that case, you would be the timeline initiator, the person who actually ran the goal if you manually evaluated the goal, or if you just manually ran a process or a knowledge view. So timeline initiator gets tricky in any context other than I'm submitting a form and that form invokes a process timeline to create the instance. There's an entire webinar where I spend 2 hours talking about user assignment. So I think we're fine with what we've covered there so far. So let's move on to the results tab. You should always have a result for a process timeline, at least one. Now, if you don't add one, it's not the end of the world. The process will run and process director will provide a default result. And that default result will just be a button with the word complete on it. And if you click on the complete button, that will complete your task, and complete will be your activity result. Most of the time, of course, we have our own custom results, approve and deny being the most common two result types that you want to add. I do have a little caveat for you to think about as far as results go for a user timeline activity. So let's say that I had two results, approve and deny. So some important things to think about for results, all of which are on the options tab because they apply to no matter how you want your results to work. You should set a specified button order on form, first thing. Now, the order that you decide to use doesn't matter all of that much from the higher level. You might want deny to be first. You might want approve to be first. But you should have a policy about how you configure your results and the order in which they show on every form. And it's kind of important. So here at BP Logix, as I've mentioned many times, we always go from the most positive result to the least positive result. So with approve and deny, approve would always be the button I want to see as number one, and deny would always be the button I want to see as number two. And I do this on every single form. And the reason that I would do this on every single form is that anytime anyone in the organization uses one of our organization's forms, even though I don't tell users what my policy is for how buttons are ordered, the users will instinctually know over time that the good result is always the one on the farthest left, and the bad result is always the result that's farthest to the right. It's not something you train, it's just a UI convention that you need to enforce. UI conventions are important in that they help train the user and manage their expectations about how your forms work. As users become familiar with your forms, the button order that you use kind of becomes second nature to them, and they know what button they want to click, not just because of its color or because of the text that you have placed on the button or icons that you have displayed. The location in the list of buttons is information that they can use even if they were completely colorblind and illiterate and didn't know what icons meant. And so therefore had a tenuous grasp of reality. At least the button order would be consistent on every single form. So that's one important thing to do. Icons, less important. I wouldn't worry about those too much, even though I routinely use them whenever I'm creating buttons for production. I do like background colors, and I do like to discriminate using background colors with my options. Now, I would be careful with background colors. Back in the old days, all of these color pickers here were much like the color picker on the activity tab, where we had this drop down with colors. As you can see, I have all of these default colors. I have an entire color palette that I created, which is now really only visible in this one drop down that's left in the product, to be sure that my foreground and background colors were all consistent in terms of accessibility compliance. So I need some dark background colors that look good with white text, and I need light background colors that are legible with black text. And so I have this sort of this entire setup of accessible color combinations. Now, unfortunately, on the results, because we've gone to this more modern color picker, which honestly, I like in some ways and dislike in other ways. I like it in that I don't have to now go into my vars file and create that entire list of colors that I want to display in that dropdown. And frankly, I'm limited to that list of colors. I like the freedom of being able to choose any color I want. And background colors are an important adjunct to the text that appears on your button. Fortunately, you have to have some text on a result. And so that is one of the accessibility requirements. If you can put text on a button, the button text should tell you what the result is. So we're cleared there. And while I am a big fan of ensuring that I use the appropriate colors, and pretty much anywhere in the world where people drive, red is stop, green is go, and yellow is caution. And so that gives me a really good kind of universally understood color language to use as an assistance to what my buttons do, whether it's good or bad. So I tend to use a green color here for the good option. But again, you need to be sure that that color is dark enough so that the button text color that you pick, which is most likely going to be either black or white, that button color must have the appropriate accessibility contrast between the foreground and background. But the most important thing is that button order, because that should be standardized on all of your forms. The start when, completed when, all of the other stuff is normal, except for notifications. One big caveat. On the notifications tab, you're actually seeing two entirely different types of notification. One notification type sends the task notification to your users. Right, so let's say this activity is applied to the timeline initiator. I don't need to do anything to ensure that the timeline initiator receives a task assignment email. That happens automatically because I have the notify participants when activity starts checkbox checked. That's a super important checkbox. I have seen on a more or less regular basis customers who uncheck that, and they've decided they want to add their own special notification to the participant. And they'll say, okay, well, when the activity starts, I want to send a notification to the participants. That is precisely what you do not want to do. I've already got a checkbox that will tell the participant when their activity starts. Plus, that checkbox is going to do something else that's important. The link that is included to the activity or the form, in most cases, the link to the form will actually open that form in the context of this activity for the activity participant. If I do something like this, okay, when activity starts, notify the participant, in this case, the timeline initiator. Oh, they'll get an email, but that email will not be in task context. And if they click on the link to the form in that email, it'll open the form. They just won't see any result buttons because it will not open it in the context of the task that has been assigned to them. These additional notifications on the notification tab of a user activity are not for activity participants. They are for additional people. We'll send one to Barb now. Barb is not a participant. Now, there might be any number of reasons why I want to let Barb know that activity one has started, but she is not going to be a participant in the task. So she is going to receive an email where the URL is in a different format from a activity participant. So Don't uncheck the notify participants when activity starts. Well, I can't say that. If you literally do not want to send an email to the participants at all, which means that they'll have to either refer to their task list, well, that's what they'll have to do. They'll have to open their task list to access that task. That's fine. You just may not want to send emails. But if you are going to be sending any sort of task notifications, let Process Director handle those notifications that go to the participants. Keep that checked. You only need to add a notification if there are additional people who are not participants in the process that you want to inform about something that has happened in the process, such as the activity starting or the activity ending, or when the user completes their task, whatever it may be. These are additional notifications that are not sent in task context. If there is no additional person that needs to be notified, then this is what your notifications tab should look like. Technically, you probably shouldn't even have the email template filled out, because you should have filled out your email template up on the options section, where you have the default email template for this timeline property. So the notifications tab here should, in most cases, look like that. There's also one more big difference in user activities than other activity types, and that is the advanced options tab. Most activities have an advanced option tab, and most of them have one property: activity is required to complete parent. That's always turned on by default for all timeline activity types, which if you have a parent activity, that parent activity can't end, whether it's a looping segment or not. It can't end until this activity completes. So what that enables you to do is use parent activities and ensure that the parent activity keeps running until all of the child activities are done. Sometimes you're going to want to uncheck this, but let's talk about that when we talk about the parent activity a little bit later. Anyway, that's the rundown on the user activity. I really should not have gone in and made any changes to this. So I am going to hit cancel here. I'm going to switch. I'm going to hit proceed. I'm going to get completely out of this activity because I don't know what I changed or what I might have messed up here. But I'm just going to go ahead and run this activity. And because I am the timeline initiator, it'll just open up the default notification. Not sure why I am now seeing all this extra space at the top of the default notification, but I don't have an email template for this timeline, so it sends me this default notification. By the way, this default notification cannot be accessed. It cannot be edited. It is actually hard-coded into the source code of Process Director, so there's not much that you can do with it. As you can see, I'm back to complete as my one button because I didn't save any of my changes. Therefore, I have no results configured. So Process Director provides that default result for me. And of course, if I click that complete button, that ends my task, and we can now move on with the rest of our day. So speaking of the notify activity, since we just spent a fair amount of time on it, let's actually go back, and I chose the wrong activity. So let's go back, let's close our options tab, and let's just take a look at the notify activity. And as you can see, the advanced options tab for the notify activity is quite different than the user activity, although you still have the activity as required to complete parent. If you have the Process Director mobile app, which is a separately licensed component, you get a second property here: enable mobile app task completion. Since only a couple of customers use that mobile app, most of you will not see it, so it's not really relevant to you but you will see the activity is required to complete parent. As I talked about earlier, there are no custom tabs for the notify activity. It's one of the few that doesn't have its own custom tab. Everything that you want to do on this tab is done through the notifications tab. So another mistake that I commonly see, especially when people who are new to Process Director, what they'll try to do, and we'll go here to our webinar one, where we should make some changes. I'm going to go ahead and create two activities to run in parallel. And activity two, we'll just say that this is my user activity. And for whatever reason, I'm going to uncheck notify participants when activity starts. And then I'm going to go back up here to activity one, and I'm going to make this a notify activity. And on my notifications, I will add a notification when activity starts, again, to the timeline initiator. So what I expect to happen now is that I'll reach this point in my timeline. I have these two parallel tasks running. One is a notify activity, which will tell me that I have a task, unhelpfully, but it will tell me. And then I have the user activity that I want to associate with it. So I've now separated my activity notification from the user activity itself. I've seen people try to do this as well. That's wrong too. Once again, there's a reason this checkbox exists. Don't uncheck it if you want to send actual task notifications to your user. So all of these extra attempts at creating notify activities or creating extra notifications in the notify tab of your user activity to notify your participant, those are hoops you simply don't have to jump through. And indeed, hoops that you don't want to jump through because you're not going to get the result you expect. Because in neither of these two scenarios is the actual task assignee going to receive a notification that will open the form in task context. You use the notify activity for the same reason that you use the additional notifications on the notification tab of a user activity. There are some extra people whom you want to tell something. Now, those people may in fact be timeline participants, people who are going to be participating or who have participated in prior activities and you're giving them a progress update, or administrative or managerial personnel that you want to give an update to let them know that you've reached a certain point in your process timeline. There might be any number of reasons why you would want to send extra notifications, but remember, none of these are task notifications. You're just sending out some sort of email notification using your normal email template. If you're going to use a notify activity, you really, really need to have a customized email template that is set up to send these sort of extraneous notifications. You would never want to use the default notification that is built into Process Director. I mean, it'll work if you do, but it's generally a bad idea. Your email should generally be customized for the type of notification that you're sending. You should consider the existence of the default notification template in Process Director to be merely a final fallback in case you just fail to configure things properly. It'll still work, but you should always create your own notification templates. All a notification does is send emails, so I guess there's a limited amount of time that we can spend talking about it. So let's move on to our next process activity type. The process activity type enables us to invoke a different process. On the process tab of a process activity type, I can specify what process I want to start when my activity begins. So in this case, I've chosen 03A subprocess, which is this process here. We'll take a look at it briefly. And by default, Process Director is going to do a couple of things. It's going to take any objects that are attached to this process timeline. So that would include the form in all cases, because the form is a process timeline attachment. And in most cases, because you should configure document attachments to also attach to the process timeline, that means that having this button checked, these two buttons checked, will take all of your timeline attachments. So the form and any document attachments that are attached to the process timeline, those will all be sent down to the sub-process when it runs. And then when the sub-process is complete, any additional forms that were created or form instances that were created as part of that process, any additional document attachments that were attached to that sub-process, those will all be automatically transferred back up to the parent timeline. This is the parent timeline. This is my main process. This is the one that called the sub-process. So anything that I do inside the sub-process timeline that is attached to that timeline is automatically going to be surfaced whenever that sub-process ends. All of its attachments, if they don't already exist in the parent timeline, they will all be sent back up to the parent timeline. So you will always have a result in your parent timeline of all the attachments that were created in the one or more sub-processes that you ran as part of the parent timeline. So if we were to run this timeline, so let me cancel out of that. Actually, let's cancel out of it and look at the sub-process. The sub-process doesn't do much. It has one user activity that is associated with it. So the parent process has a user activity, activity 1. Activity 2 will call my sub-process, and then activity 3, when my sub-process is over, will be again running. The thing about the process activity type is that when I call this sub-process, it is always called synchronously, which means this activity is going to start, and then this parent timeline is going to wait until whatever sub-process I call is completed. Once that sub-process is completed, the process activity will complete, and then I will automatically be taken to the next activity in the parent process. So this all runs synchronously. So the parent process has to pause until the sub-process is complete. So let's go ahead and run this. So we will run our process. And our task is activity 1. Good. Now we will complete our process. Okay, nothing is showing up for me. Something's in my task list. We'll go take a look at it in a second. But let's look at our sub-process. I should have an active timeline running. I do. It's this one right here. We can open it up. We can look at its processes. And in the normal default view of the timeline status tab of a timeline instance, it'll give me a routing slip and show me where we are in the process. Well, where we are in the process now is in a process called sub-process activity 1. That's the activity in my sub-process, and we are on hold. That sub-process activity is my active activity, and this timeline cannot go any further until I complete it. So in my case, what I would need to do is go into my user profile workspace, and then I will have a task here, sub-process activity 1. I've also got this. This is an artifact. Let's complete that. And here we are. I am now in 03A sub-process. So my sub-process is running. So if I click that, it's going to give me my task here for sub-process activity 1. And I can go ahead and complete that task. And now you can see I am back in 03 process and I am running activity 3. So I can go ahead and just end that process as well. And now both my process and my sub-processes are complete. There is an alternative way of calling a sub-process because you don't necessarily have to make your parent process wait until the sub-process is done. You can run a sub-process asynchronously. The way that you would do that would be to call the run process custom task from a custom task activity. If you do it that way, the custom task will invoke the sub process, but the parent process can continue through the rest of its approval steps or whatever other steps you have. And the sub process will run asynchronously, which means I don't have to synchronize my parent process with my sub process. They can both just sort of run independently. When my sub process ends, it will still send up, if I configure it to do so anyway, and the default configuration is for it to send up any new forms or document attachments back up to my parent process. But because it's running asynchronously, I won't have access to any of those documents or forms until that sub process ends. So if activity 2 here were a custom task activity and I called the run process custom task to launch my sub process, I would immediately move into activity 3 as soon as the sub process was invoked. If there were some documents or forms that I needed to review or to edit, I would just simply have to wait in activity 3 until whatever time the sub process completes, because until that sub process completes, none of those forms or instances or document attachments will be surfaced back in the parent timeline. So I won't see them until the sub process completes. So, there are advantages and disadvantages for either method of calling a sub process. The process activity is the way that we do it when we want to run our sub process synchronously with our main process. Next is the script custom task. Now, all it does is run a script. So here we go. I got the script custom task. And by the way, this is a custom task type that is only available to you if you have access to the SDK. I think at this point, that's most of you, because most of you are cloud customers. If you're an on-premise customer and you're still using the legacy tiered license, which we still have a couple, at this point, it's been, 8 years since we changed our licensing model. If you were on the tiered license, there are a whole bunch of packages that were kind of like extra add-ons that you would have to buy on top of the Process Director license. One of them was the SDK license. And most customers didn't have it. But for those that did, there is the script custom task. So if you have access to the SDK, you have access to the script custom task. It's very easy to configure. I've got to have a script in the content list. I do, the sample script. We'll look at it in a second. And as long as I have that script somewhere in the content list, and you might just have a scripts folder at the root level of your partition, just as you do for custom tasks and data sources and business values. But wherever it exists, it's got to exist. It has to be on the content list. And the script file is just a user, or not a user picker, but a content picker that I can just click to scroll through my content list, find my sample script, and select it. The script activity has a script parameters, script parameter. Actually, it's what it is. It is a property, but technically it's actually a parameter that we need to pass to our script. Now, in this case, I've written this as the parameter. Hey, the script worked and everything, which is cool because my actual script only takes one parameter called pparm, and whatever I pass in this, okay, why isn't it not moving? There we go. So whatever I pass here in my script parameters, which in that case is this text, hey, the script worked and everything, that will be the parameter that gets passed as pparm. And what this script does is not super impressive. It actually creates a log entry that says webinar script colon, and then whatever value pparm is, which is, hey, the script worked and everything. So it's not a very impressive script, but it is a script that runs. Scripting in Process Director is not, especially if you have any C# experience at all, it's not really all of that hard. Pretty much all of this is boilerplate, and it'll always be the same. And that is boilerplate. That'll always be the same. The only thing that you have to change is the content that is currently appearing in line 9 to add your own code to the script. And of course, the developer's guide has the whole SDK that tells you all the things that you can do via scripting in the product. So what will happen when I run this process timeline is that it's just going to take this text here and it is just going to toss it into the log file. I don't have any other configuration I have to do. I should point out one thing, however. A script may have more than one parameter. Now, as we've seen, my script only has a single parameter, but it is possible to have more than one. And I probably should have kept my script open to sort of demonstrate it. So let's go back over here to downloads and let's reopen my script in Visual Studio Code. And there we go. Finally, it showed up. So here is my script. And as release notes, oh, must be a new version of VS Code. Now, as you can see, I have a single parameter here. Parameters are generally separated. If you're going to have multiple parameters, they're generally separated by commas, right? So I have string pparm, and then let's say string, I don't know why I had P, I guess P for parameter, but we'll call this parm2. All right, well, now I have two parameters for this particular script. I'm going to need to supply those two parameters here. So instead of a single parameter, I'm going to need to have multiple parameters here, and I'm going to separate them by commas. That makes the comma a very important character in the script parameters property, because what Process Director is going to do when it sees a comma is it's going to assume it needs a comma because there are multiple parameters, and it's going to split up those parameters. So if I had parm1, comma, parm2, now I can pass it multiple parameters simply by putting them in a comma separated list. I also need to ensure that the number of parameters that I place here, 2 in this case, matches the number of parameters in my script, which in this case, again, is 2. This will work. This is going to be a little problematic. Also problematic, there's going to be that. I have 2 parameters. So I need I need two parameters here in my script parameters separated by uh, uh, commas. Couldn't think of the name of the punctuation. So I'm going to get out of here real quick, or at least I'm going to reload it to be sure that, hey, the script worked and everything. Great. So now we'll just go and invoke this. Now I can close the script. So let's leave. And we'll go here to our script timeline and we will just run it. Now, obviously, there's no user activity, so nothing is really going to happen other than to tell me that the process has been started. I am, of course, going to want to check up on this. So I'm going to go to troubleshooting and go to logs. And what I expect to see is this right here. It's in my script logs. Hey, the script started and everything. You may notice that this is repeated twice. I did it at 9:34 this morning before the webinar, and that was the only script that is run. So the repeat is the one that we just did right now at 10:50. So my script works. It made my log entry as I expected. Be sure that you look at script logs for this stuff. If you're producing output in your log files, you're going to want to run your script logs. I don't remember whether it shows up in the internal log, but I don't think it does. I think it only shows up in the script log. I did want to check and be sure, but yeah, I think it's just going to be the script log that you'll need to look into to see any returns that you have. By the way, you can do a little troubleshooting with stuff here. If you know your way around the system, you can actually use a sort of a troubleshooting script to have it check on the status of things and then return that information to the logs. So that's kind of cool. So if bp.logo, you can throw any sort of log messages that you want in there. So those script type of activities are actually fairly useful. Then we come to the form actions activity type. What the form actions activity type allows you to do is to manipulate the forms that are included in your process timeline. Most of the time, we think of process timelines as having, a single form instance and a single timeline instance. It's really easy to go through the process. But that is not always true. There are many valid reasons why you might want to have more than one form in your process. So in this case, I have two forms, 05A original form and 05B second form. Why might I want to use two forms in the same process? Well, there may be occasions where you're going to want to display some information to an approver that you don't want to have displayed to anyone else who has access to the main form. So for all other process participants, for example, you might just want to show them the original form so that they just see the appropriate approval comments and information and whatever the original request was. But there may be some, secret or proprietary information that a manager is going to need to review as part of the approval, and you don't want that to go on the main form. Could you put it on there and then just show and hide it? Yeah, technically. And depending on how comfortable you are with risk, that might be fine for you from a security standpoint. You'd be happy to do that. It is a bit more secure if you ensure that you just have all of that proprietary data in a completely separate form. Then you never have to worry about showing and hiding it for the right people and potentially getting it wrong and exposing, proprietary information, say, to an external participant who you really don't want to have access to some of that information. So that's one of the reasons where we might do it. Another reason where we might do it is if we wanted to do kind of a main form and a sub form sort of thing. There are some fairly complex implementations that we can do that it will enable us to use multiple forms. But whatever your reasoning behind it, having the form actions activity is super helpful, because what it enables me to do is to add a second form to the process. And you've seen me do this before, where I want to add a second form to the process before I invoke a sub process. And so I can use that attached second form as my main form for the sub process. There's a whole bunch of reasons why you might want to use multiple forms. I have the choice. The default is to, if I run this activity and I choose second form, my default is to set that form as the default form instance for the timeline. It's the default because we think in most cases that is what you want to do. So for example, in the very first scenario I described where I've got a second form with some proprietary information, well, I am going to want to make that form the default form instance for the timeline after I call it, because in the next user activity, I'm going to want to show the manager or C-suite person who's going to be participating in that activity. I want to show him that proprietary information. And so I want this form with the proprietary stuff to be the default form instance in the timeline. What that means is that I have taken my first form, which was the default form for the process. In fact, I probably have it configured right here as my form for timeline. That is my form. That's the default form. Everybody is going to see the original form unless I call the form options or the form actions activity type, in which case I can just swap the default form out. And now this form, O5B, will be the default form for the process timeline unless I swap it out again for the original form, which, by the way, I do right down here in activity 4, where I just set original form. And I will set this form as the default instance for the form timeline. If the form does not already exist in the timeline, so in this case, the second form is not part of the process timeline. If there is no instance associated with the timeline, then when I run the form actions custom task and I add the second form instance, that will now become part of the process timeline. Now, when I started the process timeline, the original form was already part of the form instance. So when I get to this stage, where I switch back to the original form, it is not going to add a new form instance to the form if the form already exists in the package. The default for how we want to add a new form instance is that. So if the form doesn't exist in the process timeline package, so the process timeline instance and all of its attachments. So the form instance is an attachment to the process timeline, and it'll look for it. If it exists, it won't do anything. If it doesn't exist, then it will add a new instance of that form. You have a couple of other behaviors there. You can actually add a new instance every time the task runs, or you can never add a new form instance. That gets a little bit trickier. The only time where you would do this is if you are absolutely positively sure that the form instance you're invoking in that activity already exists in the process timeline. If it doesn't, then your process timeline is going to go into an error state, because you are saying, I want form X to be used in this process timeline. However, I have never add new form instance set as the add new form instance property. And if that form does not exist in the process timeline, then both of these things can't be true. I cannot both call a new instance of the form and simultaneously say, don't add a new instance to the form. Process Director does not want to do when you tell it to do two completely different things. So it will do nothing and make you figure it out. It'll just drop into an error state at this point. So you never want to use this never add new form instance unless you're absolutely positively sure that that form instance is going to be added at some other stage. So for example, I might have a sub process, and then once my sub process ends, it may have its own form instance. It'll surface that form instance back up to the parent. Now it exists, and at that point, I could run and use the never add new form instance. I think in 99.9% of use cases, you're going to want to keep the default, which is only add a new form instance if it doesn't exist in the package. And the other 0.9% is every time the task runs, because there are a very limited number of use cases where you can do that. And the remaining 0.01% will be never add new form instance. But most of the time, you'll keep the default here. Form instances, or form definitions for that matter, can all have group names, just like attachments do. So when you add a form to the process timeline, you can also set its group name here. That's often useful if you have like multiple attachment controls on a form and you want to display different attachments in different attachment controls. So you might have like a testing group where all of your test stuff goes, and an analysis group where all of your testing analysis documents go. And so group names are always useful for showing those attachments, because if you are showing in a show attach control, for example, you're showing all the document attachments. And if you have multiple forms, you might have different forms that need to go into different groups to show up to end users slightly differently. Yes, they're all one big set of attachments on one timeline, but group names allow you to do that discrimination between them. So in our case, what is happening here is we are going to kick off our form actions process timeline. It's going to kick off activity 1, and activity 1 will use our original form, and activity 2 will then run. We'll swap the forms out. Activity 3 will use our second form. We'll swap the forms out again once I complete that activity, and we'll go back to our original form for activity 5. I believe the forms are different enough that we'll be able to tell which form is which, because it says original form at the top of this one and second form at the top of this one. So we'll be able to see what form we're looking at when we run it. I would point out that most of the time, let's go back to original form here, and let's go into the options tab. I do not have an automatically start this process after form is submitted property here. Normally, this you would have set up, because normally we want to specify the process that's going to get started when we submit the form. But we're going to start this by just running the process manually. And so there's never going to be a form submission, or at least there won't be, until after the process has already started. Anytime that I am going to start a process programmatically or automatically in some way, whether I'm going to invoke it via script programmatically, or whether I invoke it automatically via a goal, or via a knowledge view that starts a new process for each row in the knowledge view, the form will not be submitted. Instead, the process timeline will simply be invoked. That is why it's super important in your process timeline that you do set the form for timeline property. Because with the configuration that we're looking at here, I can't start this process timeline by submitting this form. Submitting this form does nothing. But if I assume that this process timeline is always going to be invoked directly, not via the submission of a form, as long as I have that form for timeline property configured, everything will work just fine. So we'll go right back to our root level and we will look for form actions and we will run that process timeline. And there we go. There is my original form. It is running. That seems pretty cool. So I'll fill out my data there and I will complete activity 1. And activity 2 is going to run. It's going to switch my form. And here I have a different field that I need to fill out and yet another field. So now I have filled out second form and I will hit complete. And now activity 4 occurred. It swapped my forms back. Now I am back on my original form. And look, there's the data that I originally entered. At least I think it's the data I originally entered. I don't actually remember because I was just randomly hitting keys. But I'm now in activity 5 and activity 5 is completed. I guess I can complete that timeline. We should, however, take a look at the timeline instance. In fact, let's take a look at a couple of timeline instances because I want to look at this timeline instance and I also want to go back and look at this timeline instance for timeline 3 to show us what we're going to see here. So if we go to completed timelines and we pull this one right here, we're going to go to timeline items. Now, I don't like that when I click timeline items, it gets rid of the tabbed interface. I really hate that. However, at least it shows me what I want to see. And what I want to see is the fact that I have 2 form instances attached to my process timeline, O5B and O5A. And if we go back up here to the process and sub-process, and I look at this timeline and I go to its timeline attachments. What? Oh, I don't have any forms. So never mind. I was going to show you that the process and sub-process forms were attached. I am not, in fact, going to show you that because there are no forms, so I can't show you that. But at least we saw it in the form actions timeline where we could see both our main and our original and our second form attached to the timeline. The custom task activity type enables me to invoke any of the custom tasks that can be run in a process timeline. Not all custom tasks can. Some custom tasks only make sense and only run in the context of a form. Others can run in both form and timelines, and there are some custom tasks that can only run in a timeline. In the custom task tab of the custom task activity type, you can specify your custom task. And I should probably switch back over to this one because I don't want to mess up with the configuration there. And we'll create a new activity of the custom task type. So we'll set it to custom task and I get my custom task tab. And now I can add the custom task. So I click on the content picker And the content picker will only show me custom tasks that run in the context of a process timeline. It will not show me any of the form only custom tasks. So I'm going to be limited. For example, here, I really only have 3 form CTs that I can access. One is mobile form import, which if you don't have the mobile app component is useless to you. So the only 2 that I really have are decrypt files and random code generator to generate a random code in a form field. On the other hand, uh, all of my other custom tasks are fairly comprehensive, and I have access to content actions, case, Active Directory. I mean, I have access to all of the existing ones. So I can only select the ones that I want. Once I select a custom task, so let me just select one and I'll just pick the convert to PDF. Once I've chosen my custom task, I can hit add custom task. The set container form property is very important in the context of a process timeline custom task. In fact, you don't even see it if you're in a form and you're configuring custom tasks in a form, because we assume that the form where you're configuring custom tasks is the source form or the container form. We don't know in a process timeline what form you're trying to work from. So in most cases, not all, but in most cases, you do need to set your container form. So in my case, I have a form here called custom task form. And anytime I want to do anything with data, whether I'm adding form field data to an existing form, or whether I'm copying form data between forms, you really do need to specify that container form. So I am going to pick custom task form as my container form. Any custom task that requires any field mapping whatsoever, so transform to PDF or transform to Word or fill fields from PDF or any custom task where I have to deal with a form field, either mapping a form field value to a different form or mapping data to an existing form field, I have to set that container form. Process Director has to know what form it is that I want to use to set that data. In the case of convert to PDF, it's not super important because all I'm going to do is convert the form and any document attachments to PDF. So I'll just go and do whatever configuration I need to do to make the custom task work the way that I want it to work. And then I'm off to the races. I can move on to my next activity. Of course, all custom task configurations are different and unique. So this is really the only timeline activity related stuff that you have to know is, those how to add the custom task and how to set your container form. Once you've added the custom task, you do need to set your container form before you go into the configure tab or the configure screen of your custom task. And the reason that you need to do it first is so that whenever the custom task configuration screen opens, it already knows what your container form is. So if you're going to do anything that references any form fields, like your copy form data, I'm going to need to know what form fields exist on your source form, which is your container form. Conversely, fill fields from database. Why you would use that rather than a business value, I don't know. But if you did, you would need to know, you'd need to have a list of all of the form fields on the form into which your database data can be placed. And so again, you would need to have your container form set before you open the configuration screen of your custom task. If we go back to the one that's fully configured, so we'll leave our playground timeline and we'll go right back here to our custom task timeline. We will actually, now I don't remember right off the top of my head. Do I run this directly or do I submit it? I do run it directly. So at least I was consistent about how I set it up. So I'm going to take my custom task or my custom task timeline, and I'm going to run it. And it will invoke my form. I'm going to fill out the name of a control there. I'm going to complete this task, and now it is going to call my custom task. And my custom task in this case, as we saw earlier, is again a convert to PDF custom task. It is now done. I am in activity 3 of my process timeline. And by the way, my custom task form has now been converted to PDF and has been added to my process timeline as a process timeline attachment. So here's my form and my control. And here is the PDF representation of my form and my control. Not super impressive, but there we go. I have made a PDF file and attached it to my process timeline. And in this case, I can actually go into my custom task timeline, which I don't want to do. I want to go into completed timelines, open up the timeline activity properties. You can see those are my 2 user activities, activity 1 and activity 3. Activity 2 was the PDF conversion on this timeline. And I can go into my timeline items and I can see my 2 attachments. There is my PDF file and of course the form instance that was attached. So let's talk about branch activities. So we'll create a new activity here and we'll set the activity type to branch. And I think we need to talk about branch and parent kind of at the same time. The branch activity is what we use to try to do looping and stuff prior to adding the looping functionality in the parent activity type. This used to be our only choice. So we'd go to the branch tab and we would have 3 options for doing a branch in a process timeline. I could roll back, which would roll back to a previous activity in the dependency path. And that gets a little bit complicated, but we'll come back to that. I can just start another activity. And let me be very clear. Starting the activity will literally just start that activity, whatever activity it is, and it will start running from that point in the process timeline. What it will not do is end the current part of the process timeline I am on. In essence, I will be running in 2 different branches of, well, potentially, of the timeline simultaneously. So that gets a little tricky. I'm going to have to go, I think, and make some examples and show you. And then I have the jump. Now, what the jump does is it just takes me wherever I happen to be currently in the process timeline. It will just jump me to whatever activity I select. If it is a prior activity, it's going to jump me there. If it is an activity that hasn't occurred yet, it's going to jump me there. If I jump to a step that is 5 steps ahead of me that I haven't covered, then I am not going to do the intervening 4 steps. It is going to jump to whatever activity I tell it to jump to. So let's try to illustrate how this rollback, start, and jump works. So let's go into our playground timeline here. And I'm just going to add a bunch of activities. I think I'm going to need at least 8 to make this work properly. So I've got activity 1, 2, 3, 4. And then activity 5 is going to be dependent on activity 2. And then we'll make activities 6 and 7 dependent on each other. And did I make activity 5 dependent on the right activity? Let's go to start when. I did make it dependent on activity 2. Okay. So here is my process timeline. And it is not a great one because I've already got 2 branches built in, but I did that intentionally. So what's going to happen is activity 1 and activity 2 are going to complete. Actually, I want to make this dependent on activity 1 so that I have 2 separate branches. So there we go. Activity 1 completes. And now activity 2 and activity 3 are now running in parallel. So both of these activities are happening at the same time. So activities 2, 3, and 4, and activities 5, 6, and 7 are both going to happen at the same time. So let's say in activity 7, I wanted to make that a branch activity. So now we'll go to the branch tab. I've chosen rollback. What activities can I roll back to? I can roll back to activity 6, 5, or 1. There's no such thing as a rollback to activities 2, 3, and 4. And the reason is that rollback only works for rolling back to activities that are in the critical path of where my branch is. So my branch is in activity 7. So for activity 7, well, there's a dependency, activity 6. Activity 6 has one dependency, activity 5, and activity 5 itself has one dependency, activity 1. So a rollback can only follow the dependency path back to the top of the process timeline. So this entire branch here with activity 3, 4, and 5, I cannot roll back to those activities because those activities never occurred as part of the critical path, which is 1, 5, 6, and 7 on a rollback. If we go to a start, things really open up. Now, for a start, I can start activities 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. So let me add another activity. And we'll make activity 8 dependent here on our branch activity. And I guess I should call this branch. So on my branch activity, if I decide to do a start, this is really open-ended. I can start any activity. Now, to be clear on what that means, if I were to go here and I were to say, okay, I want to start activity 3. So I say, okay, fine. I want to start activity 3. Here is what's going to happen when this timeline runs. So activity 1 is going to occur. And when it's done, it'll kick off activities 2 and 5. And then when activity 2 is done, it'll go to 3 and 4. When activities 5 is done, it'll go to 6, and then it'll hit 7. And what 7 says is, hey, I want you to start activity 3. If activity 2 is not over, it doesn't matter. If activity 3 has already occurred, it doesn't matter. What's going to happen when it hits my branch activity is it's going to start running activity 3. Also, once the branch activity is fired, it's going to run activity 7 as well, or activity 8 as well. So at that point, I will now have 2 separate activities running at the same time. Activity 8 will run because it's dependent on my branch. When my branch activity concludes, activity 8 starts. But my branch said to start activity 3. So you know what? We're going to do that. We're going to start activity 3 and it will be running. So both activity 3 and activity 8 will both be running. It doesn't matter if activity 3 has not run yet. It doesn't matter if it has already run. It doesn't matter if it's running now. We are going to start a new instance of activity 3 when I call that start. Jump works differently. When I pick jump, now it's just going to move the timeline to whatever activity I pick. Only one activity is going to run. So if I say I want to do a jump to activity 3, that's fine. So what's going to happen is I'm going to run down here. I'm going to get to branch activity 7. It says, hey, we got to jump to activity 3. And then boom, we're just going to jump back to activity 3 and activity 3 is going to run. Will activity 8 ever run in that scenario? No, not now, because I've jumped to activity 3. This gets a little complex when you're trying to figure out how to do an approval loop. It's still good for approval loops, but let's come back because I want to talk about approval loops at this point as well. Because the approval loop simplifies all of that, although it does not, in fact, remove the necessity for having that branch activity. In fact, you can see I have one here, and we'll talk about it in a second. The parent activity enables you to have a looping tab. And you can set 3 conditions in the looping tab. Most of the time, you really only need 1, unless you're going to restart by having an initiator resubmittal, in which case you'll need 2 of the 3 available properties. But you do have 3 available properties to cover every possible use case. The first is repeat loop until condition is met. So you set a condition, A equals B. And every time the loop completes, it's going to test, hey, does A equal B? If it does not, the loop will simply restart. And it is going to restart over and over again until you reach the point where A equals B, and then, and only then, will it exit the loop. Well, not only then, you can make it exit the loop, but we'll talk about that third. Second, jump back to the top of the loop when the condition is met. Usually you jump back to the top of the loop whenever you have to have an initiator resubmittal. That's the most common way. So I need my initiator to make some change, resubmit it, and then it's got to go through the whole process again. Cool. We can do that by setting the jump back to the top of the loop when condition is met property. In general, we are going to use any child activity result contains or equals, either in this case, resubmit or deny. So if any child activity contains resubmit, I'm going to jump back to the top of the loop. I'm going to cancel the loop. I'm going to jump out of the loop completely anytime any child activity result equals deny. This pretty much gives me all of the capability I need to run any sort of approval loop. And you should probably use it to run an approval loop because it does make your life a little bit easier. So right up here at the top in activity 1, that is my parent activity, and it contains activity 1A through activity 1D, although that says activity D, not 1D. But in any event, this is all fine. I will start my loop. I will run through my loop. If anybody says deny, I'm just going to exit the loop completely, and it'll start down here at activity 2A. I'll just jump out of it. All of your approvals should probably be in a sort of loop like this, even if the only condition that you set, which was the only condition that I had originally set for this one, is cancel the remainder of the loop when the condition is met. Because if somebody says deny, this is not happening, your request is denied. There is no reason to go through 10 remaining approval steps if it's already been denied. We're going to send it back to the original user and let them know, sorry, we're not going to do your request. There's no reason to continue the loop at that point. Similarly, if you want the loop to be restarted, to have the initiator resubmit it, fine, great, you can do that. Just jump back to the top of the loop when the condition is met, and the very first activity in the loop will be initiator resubmittal. I can handle my entire approval loop in a way that I couldn't before, because before the approval loop, if I wanted to exit any of those approval steps, then I had to have a branch activity after every single approval step to say, okay, what was the result of activity 1A? So it would have an activity 1A1 under activity 1A, which would be a branch activity. And it would have a needed when condition, and it would check to see if the result of activity 1A is deny, then it would do a jump to pass the approval loop. And it sure made life hard. Or I had to do something in activity 1B that said, okay, this is only needed when the activity result of 1A is approved. I could do it that way. There was a lot of extra configuration that you had to do on every single step. The loop gets rid of all that. It just does the looping for you, and you don't have to worry about it. That doesn't mean that I still don't need to do a branch, because the looping does two things really cool. I can be going through, I can be in like step 1.3, the gray one, and I can say deny. Okay, fine. You're going to deny it? Great. We'll just kick you right out, and you'll start activity 2A. And all of these subsequent approval steps will just get skipped. Cool. If I hit resubmit, all right, great. We'll run back up to activity 1A. We'll restart there. That's my initiator resubmittal step. So I can restart my loop. Cool. But what if on activity 1C, that is activity 1C, right? What if one of my results is back to 1B? Because what I want to do on activity 1C is, yes, I can deny it, which gets me out of the loop completely. I can hit resubmit, which takes me back to the top of the loop. But what if I just want to drop back one step and have activity 1B run again? I can't do that in the loop. Now, all of a sudden, the branch activity becomes relevant again, because with my branch activity, I can say, hey, you know what? Let's roll back this thing to 1B when the activity result for 1C is return to 1B. I think I just wrote back to 1B instead of return to 1B. But in any case, I can fix that. All right. So the loop covers the three use cases that cover probably 95 to 98% of all use cases for how I want an approval loop to work. It just doesn't cover that one edge case where I don't want to restart the entire loop. I just want to jump back one or two steps in the loop and just redo a part of the approval process. That doesn't cover me, but the branch activity does, because now I can roll back to specific uh, activities that are on my critical path. So on this branch, I can roll back to activities 1A, 1B, 1C, and then back even to the parent activity to restart everything. But most of the time that I want to use a branch activity now, it's for this scenario. I guess you might make an argument that the jump and the start are also useful in some edge use cases, but for the most part, while the branch activity has been superseded by the parent activity's looping ability, there are still a couple of areas where it becomes important to have that branch activity, especially if I just need to do a rollback to a single activity simply because of a result of whatever my current activity was. So it's still a helpful activity and still a helpful adjunct to the parent activity. The other thing the parent activity does is not looping. You don't necessarily have to loop. You don't have to configure anything on this tab. It's entirely up to you. And if you need a loop, you got it. If you don't need a loop, the parent activity still retains the functionality it had before we added looping to it, which is to serve as an organizational method for your timeline. It works otherwise just like any other, just like the looping does, except it doesn't do looping. It just groups stuff in a timeline. So after activity D here, well, actually, it's not after activity D. It's actually after activity 1. Activity 1 is a loop. It is a parent activity. Activity 2 is a loop. It is a parent activity. All parent activities, whether I have looping features or not, when they begin, they automatically invoke their first child activity. So when activity 1 starts, activity 1A automatically starts, or in this case, when activity 2 starts, activity 2A automatically starts. So when a parent activity starts, it automatically invokes its first child activity. And when the last child activity ends, the end of that activity automatically ends the parent activity and completes it. So notice that my dependencies here, I have activity 2. Activity 2 is dependent on activity 1. I'm not making activity 2 dependent on activity D, for example, which is a child activity of activity 1. I don't need to and probably shouldn't. Now, there may be some cases where activity 2, a parent activity, and all of its child activities, there are some cases where you would start it after a child activity ended in a different parent. But the common use case is if you have two parent activities, make them dependent on each other. Because making activity 2 dependent on activity 1 is in effect the same as making it dependent on activity D. except for one big exception. What happens if I hit activity 1B and they deny my request? I will never hit activity 1C or activity 1D. Activity 1B exits the loop. Activity 1, therefore, stops automatically. You see, for activity 2 here, I don't actually know that I'm going to reach activity D. What I do know is that no matter what happens inside this section, if I exit the loop and if I restart the loop, I don't want to start activity 2. If the loop ends normally and there are no restarts and no cancels, well, then when this loop ends, I still want to start activity 2. And if this loop is canceled and it's canceled in activity 1B or activity 1A, cool, I still want to start activity 2. And so being able to make activities dependent on a parent activity is often a more efficient way of ensuring that the dependent activity starts anytime the parent activity ends. So that is why activity 2 is dependent on activity 1. Now, activity 2 has its own children. And though when activity 2 starts, activity 2A will just automatically start running. Using it in this way without a loop is still a perfectly valid way of using it. One of the reasons that you might do it this way is to organize by function, right? So let's say you have an onboarding activity or an onboarding timeline. Well, IT has to do some stuff, and HR has to do some stuff, and facilities has to do some stuff, and payroll has to do some stuff. So, there might be 4 or 5 different sections of the timeline, some of which are kind of independent of others. Others have internal dependencies, right? I can't really give you a computer until facilities has given you a desk. And so there are some weird dependencies that go along inside there. To keep things straight, what I often do is I color stuff. So activity 2 would be that dark yellow color, and then the child activities might be these bolder yellow colors. And that gives me sort of a visual distinction between my 2 different sections of the process timeline by changing those colors. So that's what parent activities do. Primarily, they have the looping function, but also the grouping function of being able to group either functionally or by where you are in the process or by what department is doing what things. That's a useful feature to have. Next is the wait activity. Now, there are 2 primary reasons why people would use a wait activity. All a wait activity does is it stops the timeline for some amount of time. It may be a fixed amount of time that you specify, or it may be stopping the timeline until a specific condition occurs. So, a goal value might have to change, or some form field value might have to change. So, how I'm going to make the wait work is dependent on a couple of things. I think the most common way of making a wait work is by saying, look, I just want you to hold for 3 days. I think we had one person that wanted to hold something for 30 days before they would go back to it. And you need to hold it for a finite amount of time. In that case, it's pretty easy to do. So if I wanted to make this timeline, which I did, I wanted to make it wait for 3 days or 3 business days, which could be up to 5 calendar days. That's cool. I can do that. All I have to do is set my due date tab appropriately. So if I want this thing to run for 3 business days, I'm going to need to go to the due date tab and make a couple of specific changes. The first thing I'm going to want to do is calculate it from the actual activity start. There are a couple of different ways that due dates are calculated. Now, what we generally want to do is find the due date that is the least far away in the future. But if I want to hold something for a specific amount of time, in this case, 3 days, then I can only start counting my due date, which to calculate what a due date would be for 3 days, if I calculate it from the start date and time of the activity, when it actually started. Now my countdown clock begins, and it's going to run for 3 days. If you calculate it from the configured activity start, if somebody else delays a previous activity by 1 day, it's going to cut a day off of my time. If somebody finishes their activity early, then it's going to add days to my time. I don't want to do either one. I want to specify the amount of time. So I can only calculate it from the time the activity actually started. And then on the time limit expires, I've got to set it to wait until at least due date. If I set it to anything else, a 3-day wait will actually start and then will automatically end. And the reason that it will automatically end is because there is no completed when condition. So if I want to set it for a specific amount of time, then I set whatever the duration is here, and I go to the due date, and I set these 2 fields to actual activity start and wait until at least due date. I'm now going to do nothing for 3 whole days. And after those 3 days expire, the next time the timer process is run after the expiration of the due date, this activity will end, and I will move to the next activity in my process timeline. The other scenario that you want to use this for is you're wanting to meet some condition. So you can have a completed when condition that you create. You can have it complete when sub-process is complete. Now, because of the existence of the process activity type, you generally don't need to worry about this. You generally don't need a wait task. This is kind of a holdover from previous time when things worked a little bit differently. And we didn't have a process task. We just ran the run process custom task. And okay, fine, we can do that, but now we have to wait. Well, now we have the process activity type, which intentionally operates synchronously. So this is not as important. You probably won't use that much. But you do have when any result condition is met. So you can have multiple results for a wait activity. And so I have this data changed, which is my default result. I can set an activity result condition here. So some data in some form field has now changed to some other value. Great. Now that has been met. Data changed is my default result. Indeed, it's the only result I have. And so if that result condition is met, then I'm good to go. You can also wait until a certain event string is posted. Now, there are certain event strings for certain activities that happen that get posted, and they're posted to the logs, like timeline complete, form submitted, whatever it is. And you can actually tag those event strings and just wait around until those event strings are posted. When they're posted, my wait ends. So basically, anything on the completed when tab, you're looking for a conditional end to the wait. Uh, Anything on the due date tab, you are specifying a fixed amount of time before it ends. Most of the time, I think people are wanting to wait a fixed amount of time. And so knowing this configuration is very important. Um, because in general, on your start when, all of these things that are on the completed when here, they're okay and you can use them for a wait. And sometimes, like for an event string to be posted, you kind of have to use a wait. But for most other conditions, you can just set a start when condition. And, the previous activity can end, and this activity will remain in a holding pattern until the appropriate start when conditions are met. The only thing is that you have to ensure that you know that whatever start when condition you set is absolutely positively going to occur. Because if it doesn't, then this activity will never begin. So you can only use this when you absolutely know that the start condition will be met. If not, then you might have to fall back on some weird condition that may or may not happen in a wait activity. Oh, and by the way, all of these things work in conjunction, right? So let's say you set a condition, one of these conditions here, or a result condition, and let's say they never happen. Well, having a duration and a due date and saying wait until at least due date will at least give you a backup to kill the wait activity while you're waiting for your conditions. So gives you a lot more options for the wait activity. We have 9 minutes. So we have to go through these last two relatively quickly. Number 10, the case activity. This is always for case management, and the case activity really does just a couple of things. You have to specify a case that you want to interact with, and you can basically do three things. You can create a new case instance. You can add this timeline and its objects to an existing case instance, or if you're already inside a case, you can remove this process from the case instance. It does those three things. Most commonly, you'll create a new case instance, right? So if I was to run this process timeline, so let's go back to my folder and we'll just run this process timeline. The process has been started. So let's go down here to 10A, our case definition. And there you go. Webinar case 3 was started on 5/14/2026. And here is my case. I'm not going to get into, so there we go. There's my case property stuff, 5/14/2026. I'm not going to get into any of the ins and outs of cases and how cases work. So all we've done here is really just kicked off a new case instance. Most of the time, I will say you would not do it this way. Most of the time, you'll kick your case instance off from the form because most of the time your form has form fields that are already mapped to a case instance. So you're already saving those form fields to the case. So you're going to create the new case instance in a form. However, there are some edge cases where you need to either take this process out of a case, which is not uncommon. something has happened. I don't want the case to consider this form and this process timeline, so I just want to kick them out of the case. So that's common. And creating a new case instance. There are some cases where we've had users that say, look, I don't want to create the case instance on a form. But what I do want to do is if something happens at some point in the process, I need to add this process to an existing case or create a new case based out of this process. And so the choice that you make here enables you to add it to an existing case. You can set a condition if you're adding it to an existing case. In either case, whether you're creating a new case instance or not, you can add the process attachments. And if you want to limit it to groups, so if you have different attachment groups, you can limit it to those group names to add it to the case. So that's basically all it does. Those three things. I think really to get a better explanation of how it works, we'd have to get much deeper into how case management works. And well, that's not the topic of this webinar, and we simply don't have the time. So let's go to our very last one, which is super simple to explain. It is the end process activity type. There's nothing you have to configure. When you select end process, all you need to know is that when this end process just has the normal stuff here, all you have to know is that when the end process task is invoked, it will end your process timeline completely, no matter where it is called. Its purpose is to end your process timeline early. I see a lot of process timelines that look like this, where they have this dangling end process as the very last activity in your process timeline. You don't need that. When your last timeline activity ends, your process timeline ends by itself. You don't have to tell it to end. It's going to do that automatically. What the end process task is for, it's not a task, it's an activity. What the end process activity is for is to end your process timeline early. Something has happened, some evaluable condition has been met, and because that condition has been met, you want to end the timeline. Doesn't matter how many branches of that timeline are running or where you are in the timeline, you want to end it now. So for example, if we go back to this webinar timeline, and I thought I saved that. I did not save it. It had all of my timelines in it. All right, well, I guess I can't demo that for you, but wherever I put it in my process timeline, it's going to end the timeline, and that's its purpose, is something has happened. I don't want the normal timeline to run and complete. I want to end it early for some reason. It will end the entire timeline. It'll cancel any running branches, any running activities, no matter how many they are. They'll all get canceled. The timeline will end, and it'll be done. You don't need it at the end of your timeline. Your timeline's going to end itself automatically when the last activity runs. You only need it if you're ending the timeline early because of some condition. That's all 11 of them. We've got 2 minutes to say goodbye. I can do it faster than that. Goodbye. Have a great week. We'll see you next time. So long.